There's many excuses of being late to class. But this one young boy walked into his classroom and the teacher said, "Why are you late?" And the student said, "Because of the sign." And the teacher said, "Well, what sign are you talking about?" And the student told the teacher, "There was a sign on my way to school and it said, 'School ahead, go slow.'" So that's what I did. This morning we're here. Again, I keep saying in person, virtually. The beauty of this pandemic is you get to peer into other synagogues as well, by the way. And before I come here for different services, I get to see what other communities around the country are doing. One rabbi actually said this morning in New York, he's been there 13 years, and he said he has permission to use old jokes. Not sure if that one was old or new. But this year has gone by quite slow. But in so many other moments of this year, you can probably agree with me, it's gone by very fast. And in our Torah this morning, the Maftir Aliyah, we say that Rosh Hashanah is not just a new year, but in fact it's Yom HaZikaron, which means it's Memorial Day. A day to remember. A year to remember. A year that has transformed us. A year that once again we can never have imagined. And last year I stood here again by myself and I said, this is a year like no other. And I can't even believe that I'm standing right here saying that once again. It has been a year like no other. And how do you describe this year that we all have felt? We thought it was hard last year. Nobody in the building, just us. That's terrible. And then this year, who are we speaking to? Who are we with? Am I with you? I'm with you. What is going on? Rabbi Avi Weiss, a wonderful modern Orthodox rabbi, also a well-known social activist in the times of Soviet Jewry or any type of social issue, he really takes a very strong stance. He said there's one theme that he really sees within this year in the Jewish community, and that word is fear. On every level. There's a fear on our own level that, God forbid, we get ill. There's fear that what happens when we gather too much. There's fear about others' ways of thinking, about other ways of life. There's fear on an international level. Just think about the last few months. There's Surfside, Florida. There's earthquakes in Haiti. Had to add Hurricane Ida in Louisiana this week that infected the entire eastern seaboard in New York. There's fellow Americans stuck in Afghanistan. If I gave this sermon next week, we would add 2 or 3 more. But finally, there's just fear in our hearts. The anxiety that we have faced these past 18 months, full of it. Anxiety with our own mental health, our own selves, our children, our parents, and the fear that it will never go away. And I'm not here to put more fear into our own selves and our own communities, but in fact, I'm here to say the other thing. How, as Jews, can we have no fear? But I'm also here to say that we cannot have no fear. Because I think as Jews, as a community, it's in fact to embrace our fears is the way that we must live within them. To embrace those fears is how we live with them. There's a beautiful book that was written about a decade ago, or even over a decade ago, by Rabbi Harold Kushner, famous for when bad things happen to good people. And he wrote this in response to 9/11 and global terrorism, and it's called Conquering Fear, How to Live a Bold Life. Rabbi Kushner writes, I quote, "There is a sense that fear can in fact be a gift. Feeling scared reassures us that we are alive, and we are capable of feeling." He continues, "A small dose of fear can keep us alert and alive, but an overdose can leave us perpetually tense." As we all know, if you have children, fear is often invisible, with monsters under the bed. But even though there aren't monsters under the bed, we understand that that fear is tangible. And what do we do when that happens with our children? We turn on the light. And so how do we turn on the light this Rosh Hashanah? In fact, our own tradition speaks about fear and how to not just overcome it, but explains who real fools are in this world. The 15th century Spanish commentator Abarbanel, not often quoted like Rashi and Ibn Ezra, but very well known, he says, the only people who do not have fear are fools. And he gave two examples. He said the first is the soldier that goes out to war and thinks that they're not going to lose their life. In Hebrew, a fool, but they don't have fear. And the other person, he says, a person who gives tzedakah, charity, acts of loving kindness, without thinking that they're going to lose their wealth, that person also does not have fear. You know, when I was thinking about what to say, I had a recent conversation with a good friend in New York who's done very well in his own life. He doesn't have to work one more day in his life. And I say, I'm thinking about speaking about fear. Is there anything that you fear? And he said this. He said, Rabbi, I fear I will lose everything. I fear I will lose everything. And yet at the same time, he thought about that and he told me, but you know what? Having that fear, that dose of fear, not the overdose, but the dose of fear, in fact, has led to also a successful life. As Mark Twain once famously said, courage is not the absence of fear, but it's the mastery of it. In other words, demonstrating that vulnerability of our souls ultimately demonstrates the strength of our hearts. So this year, let's not disregard the fear because we know it's real, but let's embrace it. As Amos and Simon, who just lifted the Torah, they saw it's a very heavy Torah because we read from Breshit, the book of Genesis. In a couple of weeks, we're going to read from that again, and we'll read Adam and Eve in the garden. The first famous question that God asked is one word, Ayeka, where are you? What's Adam's response? Adam's response is, I'm afraid of your voice. That's why I'm not anywhere to be found. Different than what Jay just said, Hineni, I am here. Ayeka, don't be afraid. In fact, the Torah tells us over 80 times after the Adam story, do not be afraid. And why would that be? Because we know that fear is there. Because we know that we are afraid, we must tell ourselves that we can't have that overdose of fear. First blessing of the Amidah that Jay will chant in a few moments, Uvachein tein pachtecha. The word pachad, fear. But this time, the rabbis say, we put our fear not in being scared, but rather in awe of the world. The first blessing on Rosh Hashanah, Uvachein tein pachtecha, tells us to have that fear, but a different type of fear than being scared. So I want to share with you two stories that I have witnessed this year with my own eyes in our community of how that type of fear has been transformed simply by love, simply by working together. In the family minyan, in fact, some of you sitting right here have met with me over this year for upcoming bar and bat mitzvahs. And usually a year out, we say, this is what it will look like. For 7 years, I can do this with my eyes closed. I'll give you the family honor sheet. I'll tell you what the service will look like. I know what I'm doing. I've done it before. This year, I didn't have an answer. And I would tell, whether you're online or here, remember what I said? I would say, what I'm telling you right now is not what I'm going to tell you next week, and it's not what I'm going to tell you tomorrow. And I watched your jaws drop to the ground, thinking, how the heck are we going to do this? And then I wish I don't have them here, but I have them in my inbox, all the emails that I received from you the day after your B'nai Mitzvah. And you all told me the same thing. It's like you coordinated it. You said, what a blessing. Whether we were standing here, and for two families here, I was here and you were somewhere else. Actually, 3. Whether we were on Pila Plaza, whether we were in Barat Hall, whether we were standing here, we did it. We had the fear. We embraced it. Hineni. We didn't answer like Adam, but we answered like Abraham, that we are here. And then this past May, During the Israel-Gaza crisis, you may remember the social media aspect just killed us, literally and metaphorically, the Jewish people, and it was hard. What do we do? And May 18th, if you remember, international news out of Los Angeles. Young Jews eating at a sushi restaurant on La Cienega Boulevard. Sushi Nami, I believe is the name. When a group of cars came and said, "Who is a Jew?" and began to attack these young Jews. And there was one young man, Meher Hakopian, a Christian Armenian from Lebanon, who happens to be a photographer who's been at this synagogue many times for our smachot, stood up and put his life on the line for us as Jews. You know, I read that and I, of course, smiled. Wow, it's wonderful what somebody did for the Jews. But the next day, Shervin Rashdi called me and said, I reached out to Meher on social media and he wants to meet us, or we want to meet him. And so we went for lunch and we weren't just impressed, but we said, now it's our turn as a community to understand that this young man put his life on the line, fear. But now it's time to show our community what that's about. And so the next day, many of you were here. It was in the sanctuaries, one of the first Shabbats we were open again. And Meher stood up, very shy, usually behind the camera, but this time in front. The Consul General of Israel, Hillel Newman, was here. And we gave him a standing ovation. You know, Meher was actually supposed to go to Israel this summer. He was supposed to go to Lebanon, but he said, based on the love of the Jewish community after that incident, he booked a trip to Israel. A side note for a moment, he was going to go during the 3 weeks because he had no Jewish weddings, he told me, during that time. But unfortunately, the border for Israel closed with COVID, and he wasn't able to go, and he hopes to go next year. But he put fear, not to the back of his mind, but to understand that he could transform that into a moment of love. A moment that began with fear, a year, Yom HaZikaron, that we remember so many moments of fear. But for every one of those moments, and I know all of us, have a story of love. The Kotzker Rebbe once taught, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar ma'od. The world is a narrow bridge. But the Kotzker Rebbe changed that. Instead of saying, Lo lefached klal, don't be afraid, Lo lehitpached klal. Don't be afraid of yourself. Don't be afraid of the fear that can take us over. Today, Hayom, that we'll say many times in the Musaf service, today, not tomorrow, not yesterday, but today is our time to acknowledge our fears, to not act afraid, and to be inspired by love. To recognize that as hard as it was to walk in this building today, we're doing it. We're joining together to ensure that the story that continued from the years past continues with us and will continue after us. As I said before, this year was like no other. And I know the year ahead will be like no other as well. It'll be different than the last and different than the one before that. But we shall go forward. We shall be together, one step at a time. Join me. Kol haolam kulo, gesher tzar me'od. Gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od, kol haolam kulo. Gesher tzar me'od, gesher tzar me'od. Ve'ha'ikar, lo lefached, Lo lefached klal, ve'ha'ikar, lo lefached klal. Shana Tova, wishing us a year of love, a year of being together, a year where fear will transform us into a people of togetherness and of peace. Amen.